This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 163.
Job is to continue to, as we say, hold out the hope, the optimism that this kid will learn it. And that's why when we talked about 100 repetitions, I am not going to get every kid to 100. Like you said, Ken, it might be in 7th grade, it might be in 9th grade, as long as everyone is on board. And this is the systemic part, the system part of saying, I'm on board with this notion. I'm going to keep picking this kid up.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Paternity Man Rogers. Matt, we recorded right now in chronological time, we have not recorded your official sign-off show.
Yes.
But in that, which will be show 160, I will allude to the fact that you are taking a break for baby Rogers, which I can't wait for you to have that experience so you can be fully immersed in dad mode. But we had a couple shows that we recorded before hitting that sequence. So this is officially your last guest recording until you come back from your paternity break.
That is bonkers. Yeah, to give some context, not that anyone is asking, but my wife and I have been married 8 years and together for 15, and we were fortunate that we did not necessarily have trouble getting pregnant. It was not the right time for us yet. And so as I will be the ripe age of 37, I will finally join Ken in this fatherhood fraternity. And it is pretty wild that it is coming up this quickly. We're about 2 months out from this recording date, and when this show comes out, baby
this
girl
show
Rogers
will come out right around when the baby's here, or
and I mentioned this
right after.
My sister is also due with their first, also having a baby girl, and currently that due date is the day before ours. So we are looking forward. My mom is losing her mind, and we are very excited at the idea of having built-in best friends. So
yeah,
life is about to change. I wish I was a little bit springier, but we are so very excited. And Kristen, I think that's the ultimate thing, seeing the beauty of this process with the person you care about most in the world, and then to have that translate into unfiltered, unwavering just love that I've never experienced and had the chance to. Very, very excited about this possibility. And Ken, I mean, I know that it's just old news for you.
No, it's not that way when you have more than one. It's when you have your second, you don't know what it's going to be like to have another one, right? Because you feel like all of your love is in that first. And then, now I keep saying to my wife, I can't wait to love another one in a different way. And that's what I'm excited about. And what's interesting about our guest tonight, Jeffrey Benson, is so much of what he alludes to in the beginning and what we circle around throughout the conversation is about knowing your students, loving your students, understanding their backgrounds, their traumas, their potential, their deficits, their successes, and making that a part of the journey that you're creating for them. And I think your perspective is going to shift when you have a child. I think that's natural. And I think it's going to be a good, this might not be the best wording to use, but I'll just use it anyway. So it'll be a good reality check for you in the sense that I think it's going to validate a lot that what you do for your students in your class, and also make you look at some things differently. And I think that's what Jeffrey kind of gets to in this conversation about how we're talking with students, how we're acting with students, and what we're doing for them every day.
I agree, and I also want to vocalize for the people that want to have kids that can't have kids and are educators, because I think that needs to be acknowledged. I was often envious. My relationship was not ready for kids, whether that was physically the relationship. My wife was injured for a long time. That was also a contributing factor. So when you hear that you'll be so much more effective as a teacher when you're a parent, it is hard to hear when you would love to be a parent and you can't. So I want to be sensitive to that.
But I would agree with that. And I tried to, I'm glad you said that, because I think it's important for everyone to hear that. And I did intentionally try to say that I think your perspective is going to change, because I don't think parents make great teachers. Yeah. I don't believe that at all.
Yeah. So all of that to say, I cannot wait, because I think having some experience with what it feels like, the sensitivity, what homework looks like, the challenges and the fights when a bully is acting up at school and your kid all of a sudden is not as excited or joyful to go to school, or the idea of creating a learning experience the kids jump out of bed for. I think those, to have a front row seat 24 hours a day, or maybe not 24 hours, obviously they're at school, a bunch of that, but there is so much to learn, so much to gain. And it's bringing up lots of possibilities, and we can talk about this more later, but I'm planning on taking extended release from school. I'm taking some time away from teaching, not just the podcast, and probably won't overlap with the podcast, but it took me a long time to get to this point. So I am fully intending to maximize my time raising baby girl Rogers. And unlike you, I think we are a one and done family. But we have a lot of love to give, and kudos to those people out there, because I know Steph did it too. Kristen is teaching currently and will teach till the last day. She already has all the sub plans done because she is way more efficient than I am. It's really impressive what you get to see in this full life-changing, life-bettering opportunity.
Couldn't agree more. What would you say is the biggest takeaway our guests could look for in our conversation with Jeffrey?
Jeffrey is not shy around kids that you could justify being or having some hesitancy. And I think that he spells out in certain ways what those kids need and benefit from and appreciate, and puts it into a manageable amount that you do not need to see this kid to the moon, that this kid doesn't need to have an end goal that matches every other traditional kid's end goal, but whatever progress you can make along the way is progress that can be celebrated and built upon. And it is the collective journey of everyone to get to that end goal, whatever is going to allow them to be a successful and contributing member to our society.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there with that piece. It was, in so many ways, I felt like we were talking about things that we have discussed in one frame or another with other guests, but I felt like the solidarity of the conversation was one we haven't had, and one that I think was, he talks about being explicit and implicit, and I almost feel like it was the explicit conversation to the implicit things that we have discussed so many times on this podcast. So I almost feel like it served as an actual model for one of the strategies that he talks about. So let's hear from Teach Better and jump right into that conversation with Jeffrey Benson.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Jeffrey. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Ken. Hey, Matt. Good to see you both.
Excellent. So kick things off for us, nice and simple. Please officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in and related to education looks like.
Snapshot's a big one. It's like a snapshot book. I'm old now, so I've been doing this a long time. So I'm up in Massachusetts, just a stone's throw outside of Boston. I've been in education almost 50 years. It's hard to believe. Wow. I've spent a lot of my career working with kids who didn't fit into school, who found school challenging, who staff found them challenging. Work with a lot of kids who've been traumatized, abused, neglected, exploited, with disabilities no one recognized, kids who were gay or trans before schools had any safety nets for those kids. Worked in public schools, worked in private schools, was a school leader for 20 plus years. But I want to say for many of those years, I was lucky and I also was intentional. I also taught part-time because I never wanted to forget how hard teaching was. So I often wear an administrator's hat and a teacher's hat, and I wear them with equal, not profundity, but equal respect for both roles. I stopped leading a school about 12 or 14 years ago and have been consulting and coaching and writing, wrote all my books, which have been 6 now in the last 14 years, and about I don't know how many articles. I just had all this stuff saved up, and between working and raising a family, writing kind of went on a back burner. So my joke line is that I'm trying to upload everything before I die. Whatever, anything anyone can use. I just want to get it out of me. So that's what I do. Keep busy, love doing the work, love working in schools as crazy making as they are. That's what we got.
Excellent. I can't wait to unpack a lot of this and learn from your experience. What was it about working with challenging students that gravitated you towards that? And what was something that you feel was an asset that you learned in working with those students that if you were or while you were teaching just a classroom, we'll just say quote unquote regular kids, that you would still always keep in the back of your mind that you feel we always need to be thinking or aware of when working with students?
Great question. I'm going to go back to the fact that you had to say quote unquote. Just buried in that is the fact that there is no archetype regular kid.
Right.
There are kids who manage school well, and there are a bunch of kids who manage school well, and millions who don't. So, I have probably a slightly outsider view of schools, and we know this historically, this data. Schools have never worked well. There's never a golden age of education that we screwed up in the 1960s, and we've never gotten back to. We graduate more kids than we ever have in schools. Schools weren't built to graduate all kids. They were built to sort kids into kids who would go to college and kids who would work on the farm or in industry or private business. And until like the 1960s or 70s, you could make a living without a high school diploma. Industry, agriculture, small business. You could raise a family. It's not the case anymore. So I've always felt like schools could work better for everybody. And then there were those kids who it never worked well for. And for whatever reason, I felt their pain. My wife says it was because I was working on my relationship with my father, which is a whole other podcast, how we gravitate to this work. But it was a sense of kids who, I think every person has potential. I think everyone can learn everything. I think everyone has gifts to give to their communities. And so many kids go through school feeling less and less like they have gifts, less and less like they have something that they can contribute to their community. There's a niche in there for people who want to work with those kids, and not everyone does. So I kind of, for a variety of reasons, gravitated there. And then it was just such a great challenge. That was part of it. And, each kid you could connect to felt like a revolution. Um, and the work is endlessly interesting and endlessly confounding, and I get bored easily for all of those reasons. Teaching the same course multiple times a day to kids who just kind of march in and out. I did that, and it didn't thrill me. Kind of like the challenge.
I
And,
think
and also the sense of inclusion. People are just left out. They're left out of the mainstream in school, and they're left out of the mainstream outside of school. We got to do something about that.
Well, and I think you also consider sometimes when people are recognizing, getting into this field, that you want to address all of the kids. Like I'm a traditional fifth grade teacher. I have kids of many backgrounds and many traumas at this point in my room.
Right.
And there is time and energy that I wish that I had to connect to every kid. I can be empathetic to this scenario. I can be supportive of making sure that they have access to a good education. Sometimes they are able to access it. Sometimes they are not focused on it, and that outside factors I can recognize that.
Uh-huh.
But there's an intimidation, and it feels even weird to say out loud. There's an intimidation with some of these more challenging situations, not challenging children, but children dealing with unique scenarios and situations that you just want to pour love into. But definitely there is a level of discomfort, and they could go and react in a wide variety of ways. That, how do you feel like when you're talking to other educators, they can quickly gain confidence or comfort with kids that naturally they may be less drawn to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just want to say, Ken, I didn't get back to your part of, so what do I learn from that to work in other places? And Matt just basically was a segue to that, they're everywhere. Post-pandemic, we're seeing kids a little more spike in kids who are struggling in school. So Matt, there's an article, it's on my website. It's the first thing I wrote that kind of went, not viral like a Taylor Swift song, but in our little silo kind of went out. It's called 100 Repetitions. You can look at it, Jeffrey Benson online, Google 100 Repetitions. And I do this in my work a lot. So Matt, for those kids, you can't cure them. No one should put any pressure on you to think you can fix them or cure them. Your job is to set up a situation in which they come every day. They're going to mess up. They're going to have their ups and downs, and that you make each of those mess ups a good repetition, so that you make it so that they learn a little something, that you learn a little something, that they don't feel like they're a worse person for that they do. And I want to circle back to this. They do some restorative discipline so that they can be forgiven, so that they can move on from that situation, which we don't let kids do enough of. And that you realize that your job is, like in my school, we had this notion of some kids, it's going to take 100 repetitions till they master this incredibly hard thing of maturing. Like if it was just Matt, if it was just, I have this kid in fifth grade. By the way, fifth grade is the best class age to teach. I've taught K through graduate school. Fifth graders are the best.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
And yet you have a kid in your class who's struggling in ways you just can't go to the bookshelf and pull off a book like, I know how to teach a kid how to find the area of a rectangle in multiple ways. Your kids have gone off the rails. So no one can expect you to cure them. But what they can, working as a team, is what am I learning about this kid and what can I pass along to the next person? So in my school, we had this notion of, I might say, Matt, the kid who you're struggling with, if 100 repetitions is they get to mastery, where are they at? And you might say, man, I got a kid who's about a 30 or a 35. I'd say, then your job at the end of the year, get the kid to a 45, get them to a 50, let them have a bunch of good learning experiences from their screw ups. And then the next teacher gets a kid at 51 instead of 35. And I say, Matt, bless you. You did a great job. And in my school, what would happen, sometimes Ken would get a kid. It's a lot of situations like this. You might have had this kid and got the kid to like an 85. Well, there's a real story. I got a kid with a great team. Took him from like about a 45 to a 90 in 1 year. An 85, it was the most amazing team, and she was an amazing human being. And the next year, my buddy Frank got her, and she got to number 100 with him. She graduated. She got a high school diploma. And in the yearbook, she wrote, "Frank, I love you so much. You are the greatest person. You saved my life." And next to my name, she wrote, "Thanks, Mr. B." And I was like, oh, we had done such soulful, deep work. And we knew, and Frank came and said, "Thanks for giving me her as an 85. Everyone in the school knew how hard you worked." So that's kind of my main answer is you don't have to cure those kids. Your job is to come in every day, create a safe and brave classroom culture. It's one of my lines, where they come in every day. You can't control their outside lives. And you do the best to try to anticipate what their issues are. And when they screw up, you do the best to help them say, "Okay, let's pick you up. How are you? What did we learn? Let's fix the mess you made. Let's move on."
When I was teaching fifth grade,
You too.
early in my career, yeah, I agree with
Me
you.
too.
I love that grade.
Love that grade.
Early in my career, I felt like I was trying to fix. I'll just use the word
Yeah.
you're using. Fix my students as quickly as I possibly could, and maybe 4 or 5 years into teaching, we would always have first marking period conferences where I would meet with every parent. And at some point, I made a mental switch to allow that first marking period to be a learning experience for the students and especially and the parents and for me to see, because a lot of time fifth grade in our district was the last elementary year. So a lot of parents would say to me, we really want to try to get less involved with our child in terms of like forcing them to check their agenda, forcing them to do their homework. We want to try to get them to do it on their own. We'll support them if they need the help, but we want them to take the first step. We want to try to do that in fifth grade so they're ready for middle school. Conversations like that. And I started using that first marking period marker as a time to say, all right, here's where I see everything falling. Here's where I see their strengths. Here's where I see their weaknesses. Now we still have 3 quarters left of the year to set goals and to make progress. And I had a lot of students that did simple things like not writing homework, not doing homework, not studying for tests, like that basic fifth grade thing that you have a conversation with so many parents. And we would meet, we would have conferences, we would set up systems of checking agenda, point sheets, all these different things. And I would say to the parents, I cannot promise that this is going to work now, but I promise you that if we keep doing these things, and it might seem like your son or your daughter, in these stories, it was usually the sons at this age.
That's usually the sons. It's true.
It might seem like they don't care, like they're not conceptualizing or utilizing anything that they're learning. But I promise you, at some point in middle school, hopefully, but maybe high school, maybe college, they're going to lose something because of their lack of organization or their lack of responsibility or their lack of taking initiative. And it's going to click. And all of these things that we're doing, they're going to remember it and they're going to start to use it. We can't force them to use these skills, but we can force them to try them. And when they are ready to use them, they can tap into these skills and find that success. And as you were talking about your repetitions of 100, I would just like your opinion. Is that kind of what we're getting at? Like this idea that you expose them to these environments, you expose them to these skills, but it's going to take repetition and practice until they finally kind of have it click for themselves.
Right. And there's a simple line around this, and we know this from so many things. Well, I believe everybody can learn everything. I just don't know how long it's going to take. So my job is to continue to, as we say, hold out the hope, the optimism that this kid will learn it. That's why when we talked about 100 repetitions, I am not going to get every kid to 100. Like you said, it might be in 7th grade, it might be in 9th grade, as long as everyone is on board. And this is the systemic part, the system part of saying, I'm on board with this notion. I'm going to keep picking this kid up. I'm going to help the kid pick him or herself up. I'm not going to shame them. Number one thing, don't shame kids. And I'm going to help them find every bit of strength and humanity and skills they have. And the other part around that Again, I think a lot of my work is taking what we do implicitly and making explicit. Sometimes you pay consultants and workshop people to just tell you what you know and how to do it a little more often. Um, is that where was I?
Explicit to implicit.
Yeah, that we want to take our practices and make them explicit. So that we do sometimes we remember to do things and we make them structured, like you were saying, Ken. So we do them regularly all the time with the kids. And that you mark each kid's progress. Oh, I know what I was going to say is that you can only start with the skill set the kids currently have. Everything moving forward with challenging kids, you start with what they have and you move forward. You can only start with where they're competent and you build out from that. And part of what it sounded like you were doing that first quarter was finding their competencies, their islands of competence. And then how do I move forward? If I can't expect them all to be able to do those leaps, sometimes it happens, but usually it's a slow grind. And it's good to work with the parents and let them know what they can potentially do. And that no one's job is to people don't change, they grow. They grow in environments that are supportive, that give them challenges with support and give them some voice. And then you just let them cook and grow in those environments. And idiosyncratically, they'll do it.
What do you do when you are moving a kid from a 30 to a 45, but an event, circumstance interrupts that trajectory and it goes back to where it was, or it takes a big decline just because whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, lack of focus because there is some real stuff going on? How do you reestablish the priority that we are heading in the right direction? Because naturally, like I'll use a traditional reading or math goal is it's not uncommon for over the summer for those things to dip.
Right.
You're talking more about soft skills paired with functioning behaviors in a lot of ways.
But I want to say I hate that term soft skills, especially for these kids. They're
Totally.
hard and well-earned skills.
Well, and I guess I totally agree that soft skills is a terrible way to put it, but for the general related nature of it, it is maybe I don't hate it because I think it's one of those skills that are expected of kids with no attention drawn to them.
Yeah.
And they are often what we see a lot of kids really hung up on regardless of the scenario. So all of that to say, tangent aside, I think one of the difficulties that we have as teachers, and we know sometimes the reading passage it didn't pique the interest of the kids, so they're not super motivated, or an outside circumstance caused them to not eat their Wheaties that morning, so they're not doing their very best. But sometimes that downfall needs to have a stop. What do you do with kids that just are experiencing instability or contributing factors of things falling apart?
Oh, this is a great question. I'm going to tell you a small story related to that question.
Yeah.
So I used to teach at a college here up in Boston, and after I left the faculty, and I was working in a graduate school for people who were getting their masters in leadership and their masters in special education. And at the end of the year, my former colleagues would invite me to speak to people who were graduating and to kind of be like the veteran. What have you learned down the road, Jeffrey? And inevitably, some person just about to graduate, like you, Matt, would raise their hand and say, "Hey, Jeffrey, what will you do with a kid like this?" And they would describe to me this kid, and I would start feeling like shaking. Like, I hate this, like stump the expert, and I'm in front of like the whole graduating class and I'm not thinking of anything. And I'm going, I don't know what I would say. Have I lost my mojo? Did I never do this work well? What would I say? And then I realized that the person has described to me someone as only a collection of disabilities and weaknesses. And if that's all I know about someone, I can't do anything. But I have to go back then to tell me something this kid can do. Tell me where their competency is. Tell me where I start. If somebody tells me what a kid's competencies are, I can build a program. I can build lessons. I can build units. But if my focus is on the overwhelming difficulties this kid has in their life. So I think there's couple parts to your answer here, Matt. I can't answer it to a generic. It's literally each kid's a puzzle. Each kid is a really complex, beautiful, difficult, loving, incredible puzzle. And we need to, as teachers and educators, have a place to go to despair, to be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Oh no, this is really awful. The kid is down nowhere. We have to have somewhere to go. And then someone to go to and say, how do I start over? Where do we start? And do I have the resources to do it? So I want to bring up another point. My first book was called Hanging In, and was stories of kids who my schools had taken down the path of 100 repetitions. And a few years after I wrote an article. Well, it's on my website, by the way, jeffreybenson.org, called When Not to Hang In. There have been kids who have been as damaged by not getting special ed resources and placements as kids who have been sent out. And because of, I want to say, money and politics, kids are held on to too long in situations in which really we don't have the resources to make it work. And then, Matt, you as the teacher feel incompetent, the kid feels incompetent, the parents are angry with the family, the school, because they are not taking care of their kid well enough. And the truth is, we've never funded and resourced schools to take every kid where they need to go. And it falls on you as the teacher usually to be up middle of the night. Okay, that lesson's not going to work for Matt. I know it's not going to work. What will I do to accommodate them? So back to two parts. One is go back to what are the kids' competencies? Whatever has happened, where do I start tomorrow? Even if I'm building back up, if I can. And what resources do we have in the school to help me start the kid back up again? But if all you tell me is, yeah, kid can't do this, kid can't do this, kid can't do this, kid can't do this, I'm disabled.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things in my work is to do both with staff. Let's despair. Let's find competencies and work up from them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to what Ken said, with no guarantee when or how it will click. Only a deep, 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 deep faith that every human being is capable of growing.
But isn't that faith that we've had many conversations at this point, and Jeffrey, again, feel free to give your perspective.
That's why I'm here.
So much of education and even data, right? We gather all this data and then we have to interpret this data, and it is so subjective to, in our case, a 10-year-old mind with many many factors. And I've talked to other educators going into faculty meetings or these data analysis, and it's really difficult to say, hey, I'm going to really dive through and make a conclusion that is data driven when I'm really not sure if that data is accurate. There is so many reasons for that data to not be true. And we see outliers in the positive way as much as we see outliers in the negative way. A kid could be absolutely crushing it for some reason. And is that authentic to what we could expect from them in an instructional environment? Mm-hmm. To go back to the bigger point, when you're looking at these markers, these successes, and Ken, I'll turn this to you. We can take the personality, we can take out the scenarios, and we can look at the numbers, but education continues to not be a numbers-based career. And we're trying to standardize things. I think that there's a purpose behind that. I think that there's a benefit of having some consistency. And maybe that's curriculum-based, but I genuinely struggle with this idea of playing Moneyball with kids when the numbers are not necessarily reliable.
That's the Ken, right? You go first.
Well, I'm just
you can jump in first. You can jump in first, Jeffrey. I'll jump in after
that. I'm a huge believer in, that the lived experience of kids in classrooms with teachers is equally important to anything that shows up on test scores. I mean, you have you do have data, you have all the papers they've done, you have tests, you have paper, things they've drawn, things they've built, pictures of them doing things. That's equally important. Ken, Matt, I've never held data as more important than the lived experience of working with kids. It's a snapshot. And we spend too much, and I get why we do it, but we put too much weight into the snapshot when there's a film of the kid, which is the life the kid has had in the classroom.
I agree, and I think this is where great teachers solve the puzzle. There are, especially nowadays, there are amazing tools out there to collect, aggregate, and organize really powerful data about our students. And Matt, it's interesting that you're bringing this up because Jeffrey, right now I'm typically an instructional coach. I'm currently serving as an interim elementary principal just because we have a principal out, and I was asked to step into the role. And we had data meetings today, and I was very, very impressed with the teachers participating in the meetings. We were doing it by grade levels, as well as our reading specialist and IST teacher really leading the meetings. And we were using the tools that we have that show markers of student growth, as well as unit assessments, as well as classroom work. And when we were discussing students, they were talking about their stories as well. They were talking about things they have going on at home or what they observe in the classroom. And so it was a really rich conversation. And to put it to a sports analogy, data in sports, right? You mentioned Moneyball, Matt, especially in baseball. It went really extreme for a while where there were managers purely using data to analyze their players, as well as make decisions on when to take pitchers out, when to pinch hit, all of these different things. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is really great managers that know the game, those old school managers that have been around baseball for 30, 40, 50 years, who are the classic great managers, using data to help inform their decisions, but not relying on the data to make their decisions. And I personally think that as teachers, we can't ignore the data that is out there, because it's becoming more and more reliable to help us group students, to help us figure out what skills they're strong at, what skills they need help with. But it has to be a part of that whole story, like you said, Jeffrey. It has to be a part of the whole picture. And again, that's where I'm saying great teachers make the data even greater, because they take that whole picture into mind.
And here's one, I'm going to add a complexity to that, which is we don't have enough great teachers, and that's not a knock of all the amazingly good enough teachers in the world. But I don't think we can. I'm going to use another sports analogy here, which is that there are been about, I don't know how many, like 7,000 people have played in the NBA, and there are about 150 in the Hall of Fame, or 200. We can't structure schools to believe that everyone who can be successful has to be a Hall of Fame teacher. It's nonsensical. We have to actually structure the job so good enough teachers can become great teachers. We don't resource that enough. And then people blame teachers. I'm not one who particularly blames teachers very much. I think the job's super hard. And that's why I say, boy, if you're good enough, you're really working your tail off to be a good teacher. And then there's some Hall of Fame teachers in every faculty. I don't know how to replicate them. I don't. And if we only hired them, we wouldn't have enough teachers to fill a quarter of any school. So I think, but I agree with you. So how do we structure? So I want to circle to one of the things I do a lot in schools. And it's a lot about my new book, I'm Hacking School Discipline Together, which is how do we create structures that make it more likely that people will do their best versus just trying to do each individual person. There's a thing in organizational development, schools are the organizations I know, that changes 70% structural, 30% skills. You don't skill people up to work in bad structure. Job of administration is to create structures that maximize people's skills and get them to do well. So how do we get more of the anecdotal data anecdotal stories? How do we get more of the papers and the parents and all of that stuff into those meetings so that we have a rich view of kids? Because I may be going back to Matt's point about why some kids knock it out of the ballpark. Well, a lot of good sports metaphors. Knock it out of the ballpark on testers because some kids test really well and other kids don't. And if that's our sole data points, oh, we're never going to get it right. We can get a good rough view, but on any individual kid, you have to know more. So, for instance, if you are both the same teaching the same fifth grade curriculum, and 80% of Mac kids master doing area of polygons, and 30% of Ken's kids do, well, first, that's only data. But it could be that Ken needs to learn how to do that curriculum better. But it doesn't tell us any about any individual kid. I think as broad strokes, it's good. It's really tough. Or as a school, are we teaching the area of polygons well? What do we know about that? What resources do we need to bring everyone up? And then you find those individual kids who are like, and what about this kid? And then you don't necessarily have to bring in all these stories in the papers on every kid, because there are a lot of kids whose testing, lucky, is sort of harmonious with their performance day to day. There's a thing, and again, I use it a lot in my work, including the new book. It's data to information to knowledge to wisdom. Data itself has to be explained. How do we turn that data into some sense of like 9 out of 10 or 15% or something? And then we look at it and we say, what does that tell us? And the last part is the wisdom is what can we do about that? Well, too often we jump from data to wisdom. Okay, there's 30% of kids in Ken class didn't test well. That means he needs this. I don't know that yet. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Got to go through that. And then data's okay. I think, this is another thing. I guess because we're not resourced enough to do all that other stuff, data gives us something reliable.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to be enough.
Well, and I think the reason why I that triggered in my brain at least was you earlier talked about how the teacher-student interaction and the judgment of being in tune with where the kids are is so important, and a hope. That wasn't the word you said, but I think a faith that what you did to invest into these kids would translate into true growth. And Ken, I'll be honest, I don't know if I went into any state testing scenario having true faith that what I did was right for them to be prepared. What I did know is that I was going into that scenario with a mindset that they were going to try their best. And so that's all I could ask out of them. But we always have that blind faith and hope that they're going to perform how we've seen them. And so is that reliability? Is that dependable information? Realistically, it's just this idea of I've put in all this energy and effort to show you that I love on you and I care about you and you're important to me and you have a great brain and you have all this potential. That is what I've spent 140 days prior to assessment time. That is a snapshot of the year. And I cross my fingers and I say, I hope that does well enough to make me able to come back the next year. But there's nothing about it that I feel like I would want to or feels necessary to do more than that. Mm-hmm. And the hard part about this is you get great results. It feels like a fluke. You get terrible results. You kind of position it like it's a fluke. You get mediocre or, year after year after year. Yes, you can see trends,
right?
But there are so many variables to education in general. I think, Jeffrey, when you talk about the population that you support the most, I feel like what we as classroom traditional teachers emphasize is a very low on the totem pole priority, you are developing, as you mentioned early on, life skills for the population that may not have traditionally had high school graduation on their trajectory.
Right.
So what do you feel like are your foundational items that you are prioritizing, that you are putting your energy into, if you're giving yourself less permission, or giving permission to have less emphasis on, we'll say, traditional measures?
It's a wonderful question. And in fact, I live in Massachusetts, where we have this thing called MCAS, and Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, one of the first statewide testings that were done. The word C was supposed to be comprehensive. It was supposed to be like a 360-degree look at a kid. Never happened. It was reduced to a test, which is like horrifying to me. So, okay, back to a story. So I'm the director of this school before there was standardized testing. Like I'm old, and we did amazing work. Like I want to say amazing work with kids. And then the state came along and said, the kids haven't improved in reading enough from year 1 to year 2. And I was like, damn it. We had so much stuff we could have collected data on. Kids who had attendance, kids who stayed in school, who didn't leave school, kids who didn't get into critical incidents, kids who had started going to rehab, kids who finished books, kids who went to the library, kids who got jobs, kids who were reconciled with their families. All of this stuff, that was great data, and we had nothing collected. And it makes me crazy. So it's all that stuff that you could say, yes, what do we think is important? All of that stuff. But they came and said, oh, your data's not so good on reading. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, it was a bad day, a bad week for that kid. Who knew? So yes, we actually do know all that stuff, Matt. I think you could get together any like 8 or 9 teachers from any school and say, if you could measure other things that we'd want to tell the world we do to support kids, you'd come up with a list like I just did, right off the top of my head. And in fact, all teachers, and I'm not trying to hawk my books, my prior book, SEL in Every Lesson, was about the fact that all teachers I know have always had a secondary curriculum implicit in their work. All teachers. For instance, when my kids were in school, if my kids' teachers didn't expect my kids to say please and thank you and you're welcome and let my kids be rude, that would have been negligent on that teacher, right? It's in no curriculum to do that. No one has ever asked teachers to do that. So we've all had an implicit curriculum. One of the things I do at the beginning of school years with teachers is say to them, maybe let's you two guys this. Yes, I think this is good. In addition to teaching reading, math, science, social studies, et cetera, what's the implicit curriculum that you teach every day in your classroom? What is it? What are the ways you would like kids to grow in your class in addition to the standard curriculum? So think for a moment, and it could be more than one thing. I'll have Ken go first. Ken, what's 1 or 2 things you would say, kids with me, I want them to know this about themselves, the world, or whatever?
I would say 2 of the most important things that I wanted my students to know was how to be advocates for themselves, and that hard work and positive work ethic will create a better result 99 out of 100 times.
How about you, Matt?
I would say what respect truly looks like and how to receive and administer, while also developing a moral compass.
And for me, it was 2 things my kids heard over and over. You all have beautiful brains that think amazing thoughts, and no one's brain is like anyone else's. Your brains are wonderful, and your brains can learn anything. And the other one was, you have a responsibility to everyone in this classroom community. And everything we do will be based on our responsibility to each other. And they heard that explicitly almost every day. So the work on that is, how do you take that implicitly and make it explicit? Where in your next lesson plan can you say, in addition to after I give direct instruction, or we're going to review prior learning, we're going to say, by the way, this is a moment where I want you to really think about how to advocate for your needs right now. It's a big thing I do in my work too, Ken. Where in this lesson can you advocate for what you need? Here's a list of stuff in this classroom you could advocate for. Sitting with somebody else, having headphones on, asking for a different set of directions, asking for a model of how to do something, asking for more time, asking for graph paper instead of lines paper, asking to sit by the window. There are all sorts of ways you can advocate. And at this point in the lesson, I'm going to remind you every day how to advocate. 180 days of that, you will teach your kids to advocate. That's going from implicit to, because we've all had this implicit stuff. Similarly with what you're saying, Matt, right? Every day I'm going to say, okay, as we're going into this lesson, let's think about what respect's going to look like in this lesson. What will it look like how we talk to each other? How will we say things? Maybe we'll do a little modeling. Maybe we'll do a little role playing. And then I'm going to be able to praise it right away. Ken, I loved how you just spoke to Matt right there. That's the sort of respect. That's how we roll in this class. Just notch it up from implicit to explicit. That's the work. That's why I don't think SEL is a separate curriculum. We have a handful of stuff. Let's do it explicitly. Let's build it in the lesson plans.
I really believe that being explicit is a skill as a teacher, as a colleague, as a building leader that can't be underestimated. And I think too often, I mean, I guess maybe it's just human nature or the way we operate in our lives that we leave it implicit, like you're saying. But I think that I got a lot of movement from my students because I was directly explicit with them. And I told them those values. They knew,
right.
If you asked my students, I bet a lot of them would say something along those lines of some of those. And there was a few other things that I really valued as well. And I'm confident that a lot of them would mention that. I actually just received a letter from a student I had in 5th grade. She's a senior now. And she's in a writing course, and they write letters to teachers that they want to thank. So I just got this maybe the end of last week. I think it was on Friday. And she talked about the skills that I taught her and the lessons that I taught her through her interactions being in my class. She was also on my news team. We created a news broadcast at our school, and about the lessons that she would never forget. None of them were curriculum related, as everyone could guess. And she talked about how I taught her how to be a leader. And I remember working with her, and she was a very, very strong individual, a lot of great qualities. And she would come off as shy, but I quickly learned that if you gave her the opportunity to lead, that she would step up, and she wasn't afraid to do it. And she was my studio manager. I never had a studio manager before. I created it because I saw the potential in her. And she wrote in her letter that, I wish I had it in front of me, that she learned from me that leadership isn't always about taking control and being in control, but trusting your team members and knowing when to step back. And as I read that, I remember saying that to her explicitly, right? Those explicit things that you say, you have to model the implicit. Like, just being explicit is not enough.
Right.
You have to model the implicit, be explicit, and model the implicit again, and be explicit again, right? I think it's a balance between the two. But when you do that, the kids listen. When you do that, the kids start to recognize the fact that you value respect so much, right, Matt? Like, I know teaching, especially, I'm pretty sure all your kids, but I know you've told me many times, like, teaching the young men in your class how to shake hands and give someone eye contact and have a firm handshake is something that you value.
Life lesson, yeah.
Which I agree. And they need that implicit experience, but they need to hear from you. This is important. This is why you shake hands like this. This is like, they need to hear both sides of that. And so I just couldn't agree more that it's so important to be explicit as much as you can. Like, I would tell my kids what wait time was and why I was using it. So then they started to realize what they were supposed to do during wait time. It was, hey, Mr. Ehrman is not going to sit there awkwardly silent until all of us are raising our hands, because he's expecting us to think right now.
Well, that's why I call it think time, by the way. I changed from wait time to think time for that reason.
Yeah, I just couldn't agree more. Just being explicit and talking to them makes them realize what you're trying to do every day.
Right. Yeah, I think, every kid left my classroom saying, I'm Mr. B. He always talks about our brains. I'm Mr. B. He won't let anyone get away with anything that's not part of the community. Yeah, and great. Not everyone's going to do mine. But for those listening, yeah, go for it. Make it explicit. Find all those spots in your day. There's probably 15 of them where you could say it. And the cool part for me is the prompt of saying it, making it explicit, prompts me to praise it, prompts me to notice it, prompts me to model it. It's so when I say it, I'm like, oh, I'm remembering that this is also my job at this point to make this part of how I have a phrase, how we roll around here. I was went to I go to a lot of schools to do my coaching and consulting, and oftentimes the principal will say, hey, do you want to take a walk around the school? And I'll say, sure, I'm an education junkie. I want to see every school, I want to see every class, I want to see every kid. But sometimes say, we don't have a lot of time. I'm guessing I'm going to see a handful of Hall of Fame teachers. I'm going to see a bunch of good, solid teachers. I'm going to see a few people who probably shouldn't be teaching anymore, right? And usually they'll say, yeah. I say, oh, let's sit down and do our other work. One principal grabs my arm, pulls me into the hallway and says, yeah, I want to show you how we roll around here. That principal wanted me to see how the culture that she had worked with her team on for so long was imbued in everything you saw. You saw it everywhere. And that's what I say to teachers and principals. In your classroom, Matt, kids should know that's how we roll around here. Mr. Rogers talks about this. In Ken's class, that's how Mr. Ehrman, that's how we roll in this class. So I would say that to my kids. I say that to the faculty in the school. That's how we roll around here. And how we roll around here is sort of a version of culture. But it's like you see it, you feel it, you hear it. It's inescapable. And you have to do that by being explicit, by hearing it. As a faculty, you can do it too. You can, do it on a grade level. You can do it in a school level. You can do it. I know one school I work in has like monthly things. Everyone's going to be explicit for a month at a time about this. So the kids are going to get endless lessons, endless opportunities, endless praise. I want to keep coming back to praise. Yeah, it's great work. That's why as hard as it is and as difficult as schools is, the potential to, it's our privilege and it's our responsibility and it's our opportunity to be engaged with young minds and influence them. Like, what's better than that? Except if there are 35 of them and I'm like overwhelmed by all of it.
Exactly.
But otherwise, short of that, that's why we love it. We always say the kids are the best part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the curriculum is how we get to the kids,
What, and I'm just interested in your own reference, and Ken, I would love to hear your take too. You said that you wanted variation and change and every day to be different, and boy, does it sound like your day was inconsistent. There wasn't a whole lot of repetition in, I'm going to crank through this lesson and do it 3 more times today. At what point in your career did you feel like you were prepared for that? And the reason why I asked that question is because I just changed grade levels.
Oh.
And one of the things that I'm craving is some level of, I got it.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
I taught my previous grade level, 4th grade, not a big change in, number form, but a big change in curriculum in some ways, which is ridiculous to say out loud. Everything, so much of this is brand new material, yet it's only 1 grade away.
But developmentally, kids are also a year older, and there is a difference between a 4th grader and a 5th grader.
Totally. I am feeling like I'm craving being bored of the traditional ways of
being bored
how,
of being
how I did this, so that I could then go and launch into the creative side.
Right.
But when did you, or how did you find yourself getting to the point of survival mode,
right,
established and refined mode, and then creative mode? Because I think that is something that we all navigate as educators.
Totally true. I'm going to say this is both for teachers and school leaders. It takes 3 years, and you just said it. What you said, the first year is just survival, second year is refining, third year is competency. Sometimes I think of it as when you're going downhill skiing. The first time down the hill, just don't break your legs.
Yeah.
The second time down the hill, I've waxed my skis a little more. I'm seeing where things are. Third time down the hill, I start to relax and enjoy it. I'm a musician. Not till my band plays a song 3 times in a row correctly do I think we know what we're doing.
Totally.
The first year you do a curriculum, there are three kind of big factors. I'm telling you what you know. One is the curriculum. The second is my ability to teach that curriculum. And the third is the kids' developmental readiness for that curriculum. So the first year it goes really well, or period 1 it goes really well. Period 4 it goes terribly. Was that me? Was it the curriculum, or was it the kids? It only takes till the third year you can say, okay, I know in this, I have some lessons you probably both do. I could teach it to anybody, and it's going to be a great lesson. The lesson is just a killer, great lesson. There are other lessons I'm like, not today with this group of kids. And there are other lessons where there aren't enough prerequisites and it's not the right day or it's too late in the day. So it takes 3 years to sort out what's me, what's inherently going to embed in the curriculum, and what's my kids' developmental readiness for this curriculum. Does that make sense? For
Totally.
a principal, similarly, God, it takes a long time to understand how to be a principal. And when teachers are upset with principals, I have to say to principals, no one gets how hard it is to do this job. And everyone thinks, oh, you're the principal. You know how to do everything. It's like, give me 3 years and I'll know what I'm doing. It's a really hard thing to do. So we all have to give each other a lot of grace and space in those first 3 years. You know, don't be toxic. Don't shame kids. Don't be disrespectful. Yeah. So Matt, 1 year and with all that experience you have, it's right. You're going downhill the first time with this group of kids. Whoa, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can, I agree with that 3-year time horizon. I actually a lot of times like to ask teachers what advice would you give to a year 3 teacher, because year 1 and 2, you like you said, you're trying not to break your legs. You're trying just to navigate the hill without falling. And when you move elementary grade levels, when you change courses in secondary, I think that year 3 timeline picks up, right? Matt understands a lot of the curriculum, especially 4th to 5th. A lot of it's the same. It's more of him now understanding what developmentally can those students grasp quickly, what's still a struggle for them. So, you can pick up with that momentum, but you do need to give yourself grace in that. So I would love to continue this conversation, but I want to jump into our exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Feel free to exercise some think time if you need to there, Jeffrey, between
Thank you. I appreciate it.
after you hear the question. What is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Listen to them. Be fully present when a kid is talking to you. Put everything down and let a kid know with your entire body and ears and everything that you are literally listening to them as deeply as you can.
What is the best piece of advice that you've received, and it may have came from a colleague, supervisor, or even a student?
About anything.
Yeah, you get to interpret it how you'd like.
All right. I'm thinking this goes to, I had an amazing mentor when I was a first year principal. And he said, my job was to give people feedback to help them grow in their work. And that I had to do the hard work of giving feedback to people. He said to me, I could not withhold feedback from somebody and then damn them for not getting better. Hard advice, man.
Yeah.
Damn hard advice.
Which may lead into a great next question. The school year goes in waves, that there are days, sometimes weeks, we're struggling to survive. We're recording this right now in February,
Yes.
which is always the longest short month of the school year. What can you share with every educator to help them power up through those moments of struggle?
So one thing is, I'm an outlier. I actually loved teaching between January and April. I felt like I was the only game in town. Spring wasn't knocking on the door. We knew each other really well. The routines and everything were established. That was pedal to the metal time for me. I love that time of the year. And it was also my way of saying that's how I get through the dark days.
Totally.
Because this is the time when I can get more out of kids than I can ever get out of them. I loved that time of year. So partly it is what we don't do in school enough is repeat and go back and do a lesson so kids can reach mastery and feel success. It's this stupidly endless freight train running through the year. So on hard days, hard weeks, go back and do something that you've done already. It's okay to do that. It's not a bad thing. Kids should experience competence. They should experience mastery. They should experience extension.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's going to be a wasted day. Go back and do a lesson again. Do a variation of it. It's a fun thing to do.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. I actually feel like I felt the same in terms of loving this time of year to
You
to
guys
teach
are
because
you're both wrong. You're definitely wrong.
I started off saying I was an outlier, but I've known that for a long time, man.
it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies? And maybe even to add the ones that you think strive to be those Hall of Fame teachers.
I'm going to answer this slightly differently, which is how do I help other teachers do that? And I think how to help other teachers, because the ones who are going to be the Hall of Fame teachers are going to do that. You know, there's something else going on. It's a little like going back to the kids in the adult way, which is what do they find joy in? Where do they have competence, and where do they feel like their growing edges are, and to be in dialogue with them? To make them first feel like, wow, you're doing well enough. This is good. Where do you have fun? Where do you want to extend a little? It's a different thing for each person, but I think they need somebody. You know, I'm a big believer in everyone having mentors, everyone having supervision, which isn't checking off that you've done things well, but where you get to sit and talk shop, and you get to sit and talk to somebody about, I'm struggling with this class. I love this class. I want to figure out how to do this better. Have this lesson coming up. I'm not so sure it's good. We need to have people we can always go to in school and do that. So I always strove in my school to be partly that person, or to have people and we talk shop. That's the other part, is in staff meetings, we didn't do business, we talk shop. We had meetings where we just talked about lesson planning. We did curriculum development together. And so how we rolled around here was we talked about teaching and learning. And I think you need to, going back to the structure part, 70% structure, 30% skills, create a school culture in which you talk shop about teaching and learning.
I love that. It is very clear that you have plenty of insight on topics that are difficult to gather information, whether it's the population or the strategies, the social and emotional side of what you teach. How can our audience follow along and continue to learn with you going forward?
Well, I would love that. So my website, jeffreybenson.org, is kind of the place to go, has connections. All my articles are linked there. Like, we had to go back because some of them were dead links from our magazines and things. So my website, Guru, who's great, we found everything. So you can go to my website and find every article I've ever written, links to all my books, new book just out, Hacking School Discipline Together. Plus, here's an interesting one, Matt. Write to me through my website. I hop on and do Zoom meetings with people all over the country for 15 minutes or 20 minutes because I love doing it. Like I said, it's my favorite thing to do. If I'm not talking to you guys right now, I'd be vacuuming my house or doing something else.
Yep.
I'd much rather be doing this. So anyone who wants to be in touch with me through my website, I will write to you. I will chat with you. It's my favorite thing to do.
It's awesome.
Awesome. Love it so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, Jeffrey. I really appreciate your time. I think you have a lot to offer both Matt and I as well as our listeners. So thank you for your insight, your advice, your ideas. And I just appreciate what you've been doing in education for over 50 years now. So please continue to close to 50.
Yeah.
So please continue
I'm hanging in.
to be that positive light and be an impact on education to benefit our students across the country. So thank you again for your time. We'll link up to your website right in our show notes, which you can find wherever you're watching or listening. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our podcast. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
As we power down this episode, Jeffrey, you have left us feeling powered up. Thank you for the time, and we look forward to another great conversation this time next week. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.